Business Growth Talks podcast is created and hosted by Mark Hayward. In this show, we talk about how to grow a business in the growth stage. The growth stage is often marked by rapid developments, increased revenue, and an escalating customer base. In each episode, we talk to entrepreneurs and business owners who have grown businesses, and we cover topics like scaling processes, market expansion, financial management, human resource and talent development, and customer retention. If you are looking for actionable advice, tips, and techniques on how to grow, run and build your business, this is the podcast for you.
Today we have Kenneth Berger. Kenneth is an executive coach to startup leaders. He helps them by fending off burnout and encourages them to make their mark on the world. Kenneth has 20 years plus experience in the tech industry. He was a former founder of a tech business, one of Slack's first hires as product manager, and has a book that's going to be released soon called Ask for What You Want. Kenneth talks about the highest moment in career success can also have the most challenges emotionally. Kenneth is based in San Francisco, USA. And if you are enjoying this content, please do consider subscribing and then you won't miss an episode. Also, you can learn more at businessgrowthtalks.com. Hello, Kenneth. How are you today?
I'm well. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Absolute pleasure. I'm really fascinated to hear some stories about your experiences in the tech industry and also about being an executive coach. So thank you for being here today. I ask the same question every episode. The first one, what does a business mindset mean to you?
I think for me, business mindset is around impact. That I think the default point of view around business mindset can be, oh, it's about making money or having profit or getting bigger. And I think growth to me is a means to an end, right? If you're growing, what are you trying to grow? What impact are you trying to make? And so when I'm trying to understand the business mindset of my clients, I'm asking them, sure, okay, I'm sure you want to grow, I'm sure you want to make money, but like for what, right? What's the impact? What's the mark that you want your business to leave on the world?
Do you think the idea of impact is different for tech industry, as you specialize in tech industry, versus something like the finance industry?
I think certainly you can generalize, right? I think not everyone has the same glossy-eyed idea of impact in the finance industry as in tech, where everybody thinks they're changing the world.
Yeah.
TBD whether that's true or not. But I think ultimately it's about whether it matters to you, right? Even if you're taking some time off from work and you're spending time with your family, that's an important impact too, right? It doesn't have to be about changing the world, right? It can be about just whatever smaller sphere is important to you. And if that means it's spending time building relationships with your family, helping your kids grow up, that's a meaningful impact too, even if it's smaller scope.
Is money always, or in most cases, the driving factor for these tech industry leaders that you're helping?
It's funny. It's a great question because I feel like maybe I don't know if it's specific to the tech world or not, but there is this funny relationship where on the one hand, everybody wants to get rich, right? That's the dream, right? Okay, we're going to make our company big, we're going to get bought or go IPO and have millions of dollars. And yet at the same time, it's a very kind of casual industry, right? It's not like people are flashing their designer goods or flying private jets everywhere. They tend to be pretty low key. And so I think that's part of what I'm often trying to sort out with people that, okay, probably you want money as part of your goals for your life, but what does that enable for you? And what I find more often than anything is it's really about freedom, right?
Yeah.
That they feel constrained, right? They say, oh, I have to do this thing. I have to do this. I have to do that. I don't like that feeling. I want to have a feeling of being able to do whatever I want, whenever I want. Right. And that's really interesting because money is one component of that, right? That makes that easier. But a lot of that is mindset too, right? Of giving yourself permission to make the choices you want to make.
Yeah, I think freedom. So I worked, my audience know this quite a few times I've said this, but I worked in corporate for 13 years and left and started running businesses and real estate and stuff. And the difficulty I've found now reflecting on that corporate time was the lack of flexibility, the lack of freedom that you have, the essence of a demand to be in the office 8 till 8, 9 till 10, whatever those numbers are. I was doing 12 hours easily for a long time. And now the change in mindset of having the flexibility and freedom is something that I think as entrepreneurs and the business owners, that's what we're striving for, to be able to dictate our plan, how we want to attack things and how we want to make decisions. Do you, do you work with people that have, I'm assuming some of your clients have done jobs or careers before they started their business. What's your sort of a viewpoint on that reflection time when people are moving from corporate to their own businesses?
I think often part of the journey I'm helping those folks go on is really owning the choices they're making. Because it's like one of these classic victim mindset things, right? You can come in saying, oh, there's nothing I can do. I have to work this corporate job. I have to work 12 hours. There's nothing I can do. I'm stuck with this. I blame all these other people, or I blame society, or I blame myself, even. Versus coming in saying, you know what? I'm choosing to work 12 hours. I'm choosing to stay at this company. And yeah, like that has certain consequences, right? Like certain positive, certain negative.
Yeah.
But to me, that's really the big shift from the sort of this victim mindset, this pointing fingers sort of way of looking at the world, to owning, yeah, like I'm making a choice. I'm not as constrained as I think I am, because every day that I continue with this job, I could quit tomorrow. I could quit any day. And so every day I come in, I'm choosing to continue down this path. And I think that once people own that, it's really unpredictable, right? It can be actually really reinforcing to say, oh yeah, you know what? I am choosing this. And I do the compromise this gives me, because the corporate job, maybe it's boring, but man, does it let me not have to worry on weekends, that I know the company's going to be there. I'm not having to think about existential, questions for the business. Or for them to say, oh my gosh, I am choosing this. I don't want to be choosing that. Why am I making these decisions that lead to outcomes I don't want? But either way, sort of ownership is the beginning of that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me one thing about your upbringing which reflects on who you are today.
Let's see. I think I have always been a bit of a sort of think from first principles kind of guy, right? I've always been like, I don't need to do things the normal way. I'm going to figure out my own way and my own truth. And so I think that in a certain way that's been really helpful for my own entrepreneurial journey, because of course that's something we all have to do, is find our own path and find our own truth. And I will say that part of my journey in the latter half of my life so far has been really absorbing, yeah, best practices are there for a reason. Tradition is there for a reason, right? Because I remember even when I was getting married and having kids, I was like, I don't know about this. Do I want to get married? Do I want to have kids? Maybe I want to go live in Europe or climb a mountain or whatever it is. And now I got married and bought a house and had kids, and I love it. There's a reason these sort of traditional paths are there, and there's a lot of fulfillment there. So I think that's a tension that I'm always holding, right? Like where do we need to think from first principles and find our own path? And where can we actually learn from tradition and wisdom and best practices?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So as a coach, when I was doing the research, it talked a lot about burnout and how you can help tech businesses deal with burnout and overcome it or prevent burnout. What is your approach when you're looking to help people that are right on the edge and trying to prevent them to have that burnout?
So I find that a lot of the key to starting to work through burnout is actually really getting in touch with how you feel, right? And this is one of these things that so often in a professional setting, right? We got two feelings that are acceptable, right? There's fine, right? If someone asks you how you doing, you can say fine, or you can say, oh, I'm tired, I'm busy, I'm stressed, right? Some expression like, oh, not so good. It's low key. It's an expression that I work really hard and I'm really tough. And I think the problem with both of those is they don't really allow any room for, this is really not okay, right? I'm in a place that's not okay and I need change. Because tired, busy ends up being this sort of badge of honor, and fine is so broad as to be meaningless. And so a lot of when we start to see the hints of people being like, oh, what am I doing? I don't feel motivated anymore, or I feel so exhausted day to day, or I'm not sleeping. That's often a cue for me to say, yeah, so let's dive into it. It sounds like you're not feeling fine. You're not feeling just tired, busy, but you're feeling something other than that. And having that not be something coming from me, but them actually articulating, yeah, this isn't okay. I feel exhausted and frustrated and furious sometimes, or deeply disappointed, or whatever it is. I think owning that those feelings exist and that they're important, that's the beginning of the inspiration of change. Because otherwise, it's I'm fine, or I'm just busy, which is also fine. So how are you going to inspire change out of that?
So fine is absolute cop out. It's an absolute cop out answer to say because it's a nothingness response in that everything's, or you could say everything's okay. And but fine is different because okay means you've got good and bad in your life. But fine is that blanket answer where you're just like, it's just fine, isn't it? How do you deal with that when they say fine? Is that a trigger? Is that a red flag in your head when they use that word that actually there's something deeper here which they might not even be embracing or acknowledging yet?
I do definitely listen for that word because I think sometimes it's just a pleasantry. They're just being polite and I don't
Yes.
need to make an issue of it. But if we're talking about something painful or difficult or even just a problem that they want to solve, right? And then all of a sudden they say, you know what? Actually, that's fine. It's no big deal. I can
Right.
just wait it out another 6 months. That's when I really will step in and challenge and say, you know what? It sounds to me like it isn't fine. And I guess I'm curious, what if it weren't fine? Right? Or what's making you say that it's fine when it seems to me that it isn't, right? Based on these other things you're telling me. And so I think that tends to point them back inwards to really check and
Yeah.
say, all right, I know I said that it was fine, probably because I have a reflex or an impulse, or maybe
Yes.
I got uncomfortable, and fine is a place I go when I start to feel uncomfortable. But to check again, or maybe even check a third time, be like, how fine am I? And always there's more nuance behind that fine.
Yeah. And the other question I wanted to ask you about burnout was, can you have burnout if you're passionate about what you do?
It's a good question. That's a little bit of a fuzzy term. So I think it's hard to put really clear outlines on that because I think by some definitions, like the definition of burnout is losing motivation, not being interested or passionate about the work you're doing. But I think the reality is often these things are layered and complex. That if you're running your own business, you might be still very passionate about building it, but you might also have a part of you that's really frustrated with it or just wishes that they could quit. And so that's where we'll start to go a level or two deeper to understand the why, the motivation. Is the passion truly coming out of, yeah, this is the difference that I want to make in the world, and this is who I am and what I stand for? And I'm willing to invest a certain amount of time and money and energy and even pain into that. Or, and this is very often the case, am I just afraid of what it would mean for me if I fail?
Or
And I think
or
that's
quit?
or quit, right? If what would it say about me? What would other people think? Are they going to see me as a failure? Am I going to see me as a failure? Am I going to feel terrible about myself? And that's the kind of motivation where negative motivation works, right? Running from fear does work, but it comes at this deep cost. And it's not necessarily pushing you in the direction you want to go when you're running away from something in fear, as opposed to running towards something out of joy or love or what have you.
I always think about burnout is probably that the business owner is doing something that they don't enjoy. So they might have passion for the business and believe in the business, but they're doing sales calls or they're doing operations or they're managing people. And actually, they don't like that part which they're doing. They might love the business and believe it's going in the right direction. It's just that bit that they don't enjoy doing and they're having to do it because it's their business. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a scenario that comes up for sure. And I think it's when it comes to owning the consequences of their decisions, really to me it comes back to understanding exactly what that impact is, right? Is it that they're a little annoyed by doing sales calls or dealing with a difficult employee? And so they're willing to make that investment in terms of doing something that's a little difficult or uncomfortable for the fulfillment of achieving whatever they're going to achieve.
Mm.
Or is it more, no, I don't like this isn't worth it. Like, why am I doing this? Am I just on autopilot or am I afraid of what the consequences would be if I stopped? That's where I'll start to get more curious about, okay, what could we do instead? Is this something that we can outsource or we can change? But either way, like we can acknowledge that this is not this is not what we want. And once they've acknowledged a desire, then we can work with that. It's more the tricky part is when they're like, oh no, it's fine. Right back to that fine thing. Yeah, it's difficult, but I'll work through it. And I try to raise the bar a little bit and say, fine is not good enough. Let's get you to a vision for your life that's actually deeply meaningful and exciting.
So I can see this going in two different directions, and we'll cover both. One is about the failure if the business fails, and the other area I want to talk about was delegation. So let's talk about failure first of all. You mentioned it earlier. Some business owners keep the business going, even though it might not be it might not be profitable, might be a difficult scenario that they're in. How do you approach when you're talking to one of your clients and you can see the business is on shaky ground? They're not the right leader, perhaps, at this stage of the growth. How do you broach that with a client when you're like, actually, this is a failing business and you might have to wrap it up and do something else? If you were in that scenario, I don't know if you've been in that scenario, but if you were in that scenario, how would you broach that and how would you deal with that when you're talking about failure of a business?
So I wouldn't broach it myself, right? Because it's not for me to measure what's success or failure in a business, right? If it's literally, okay, we're running out of money, we can't pay the employees. Okay, maybe there have been a few cases where the founder's head is deep enough in denial that I'll say, hey, seems like we're running out of runway here. But really, it tends to come more the other way, right? That they're feeling very attached to a given outcome. And they say, what do I do to make sure that this thing doesn't happen? And I
Right.
think to me, this is one of the classic entrepreneurial moments because we're working with businesses that are deeply unpredictable. The world in general is unpredictable, but especially small businesses are
Mm.
unpredictable. And so they say to me, Kenneth, all right, you're the coach. Help me make sure that this thing happens or that this other thing doesn't happen. And I have to say back to them, we don't control the future, right? We can't make sure, right? If we're going to use that particular language, we can't ever be sure about anything. And so instead, where we tend to go is say, all right, you've chosen this job where you have to make all these choices, not knowing where it's going to go. And you're going to have to deal with the discomfort of just having all this uncertainty you're sitting on every moment of every day. So, how do we help you move forward even in that uncertainty, even not knowing that you're going to get the outcome you want, that success or failure or what it's going to mean to you or to other people, all that is fuzzy in the future. And for that, it really comes down to the stakes. That I think if people are in that mode of, oh, if I fail, then it'll be awful and I'll lose all my value as a person and people will laugh at me and I'll feel worthless and awful, then those are super high stakes, right? It's not just about, oh, I wind down the business and I go take a corporate job,
Yeah.
right? It's no, it's like my value as a human being is on trial here. And so often we're trying to get away from that mindset to say, you know what? It's not your value as a human being is not on trial. Because
Mm.
when they can own that I'm actually going to be valuable and okay, regardless of what happens with my business, ironically, that's when people actually start to feel brave enough to start taking bigger bets and actually going for what they want in the business in a bigger way, because they don't have to be afraid of, oh, am I going to be a failure and branded as a failure forever? They say, whatever, man, like it's a business. We're going to make some bets and see how they go. And if they
So
don't
what
go okay, that's okay too.
so what's your view on risk for entrepreneurs?
It's up to them how much risk they want to take, right? And it comes back to that ownership piece that do they want to make an existential bet that if it goes well, then the business will 10x. And if it goes poorly, the business will go out of business. It's up to them. How much do they value the meaning of making that bet versus safety, stability, continuity, etc. And so I think that's another one of those things like money that doesn't get talked about a lot because it's not as sexy to say, I value stability, especially the entrepreneurial community, of course. And yet, what an obvious thing to value, right? Of course, all of us value stability and security to some degree. Um,
I've got to challenge you. I'm listening to Elon Musk's biography by Walter Isaacson, and I'm fascinated by his need for conflict and drama and just to have a life where stability is just not part of his mindset. He has no interest as well as no expectation of any stability in his life. And Elon Musk is an extreme example. I know that. I'm not trying to say that's how all entrepreneurs live their lives, but I think that's interesting. You said that. I think most people desire stability, even if they don't have the personality to fit it. They would like to be married for 30 years, 50 years, 100, whatever, 50 years, whatever. But in reality, some personalities are just not made for it. I'll give you another example. I read this a long time ago. Nelson Mandela, a complete switch from Elon Musk, but Nelson Mandela on his book, it was that Long Walk to Freedom, I think was the book. Now, he obviously is a phenomenal politician, person, and what he did in South Africa was incredible. But he had 3 failed marriages. He had whatever number of children with the 3 different wives. As a human being, as a husband and father, he was terrible at it. But as a politician, as a person that changed the world and changed South Africa, was an incredible person. So I'm just interested to explore with your views on the differences between being a business leader versus being a good person.
So I guess I'd frame it slightly differently in the sense that I think that what security looks like for different people can really be quite diverse, right? And I'd say broadly, if I look at entrepreneurs I work with, either you've got kind of people pleasers, and so their mode of feeling safe is I have good relationships, right? Because if you look at human history, having strong relationships is a pretty strong way to feel safe, right? And
Yeah.
so very
Yeah.
natural inclination. And so the challenge with people pleasers is, okay, great, I've got great relationships with people, but I'm not standing up for the things that I want, right?
Mm.
Because I'm afraid that if I push too hard, then that's going to mess up my relationships, right? And so for them, it's about, great, you're great at building relationships, but this fear of hurting those relationships is holding you back from taking the stands you want in your life.
Yeah.
And then the opposite end of the spectrum is control freaks, right? And so I think of those as more the people like Elon Musk, where, man, is that guy taking a stand for what he wants in his life? But how's he doing on relationships, right? Not so great, right? A lot of
Questionable,
people
yeah.
very angry at Elon Musk. And that's a choice too, right? Asking for what you want in a very aggressive way, right? Yeah, it's a great way to make a difference in the world, but you're limited in how far you go when your relationships aren't strong, right? And so often for those folks, it's about learning to take a no, to say that, yeah, you know what? Other people have agency. And when they say no, that means no. And how do I learn to respect that and learn to build relationships and still push for the things that I want? Because it's not a question of do one versus the other. It's a question to do both.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting the contrast between Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, both looking to go to Mars, both looking at space exploration. And Elon Musk is determined to get us there, multiplanetary. Jeff Bezos started from a similar position. I don't think he's put a person in space yet. He hasn't successfully. And Elon Musk's retort to Jeff Bezos is, if you spent less time on your yacht and more time at building a rocket, you might have been more successful. So I think you are right. I think there is a distinct difference between people who can't stop and just are so determined with a ultimate goal versus other people that are actually like, I'm going to enjoy this life as well as achieve great things, but I'm assuming that the people that you speak to are probably towards the Elon Musk side than the people who are enjoying the freedom that comes from business. That's why they're looking for a coach.
I think there's multiple variables here, right? I think that often when it comes down to looking at the suffering that people have, right, as business leaders, so often it is because of that sort of sense of not feeling safe no matter what they do. And so they're always looking for something external, like control of the situation or having these strong relationships with others in order to feel safe. But the problem is that we don't control the world. We can't ever have everyone like us. And so these strategies, even though they're very common, right? And you're right, they can drive business leaders to the ends of the earth, right? Achieving all these amazing things. But often it's at a great personal cost, right? They're like really suffering because they're not really running towards anything. They're running away from that fear, right? If I am so terrified of failing or being disapproved of or having people not like me, that I am willing to do these amazing, inspiring things. And sure, great. Like, all right, we get great electric cars. But for me, my bias is more towards the personal experience because I see the sort of inner world of these people's and the way they really hurt. And to me, it's a tragedy because you can make these big achievements without having to be motivated by fear and running from feeling like a failure, right? You can do it saying, I know I'm not a failure, that I have value as a human being no matter what. But guess what? I still want to go to Mars, right? I still want to build these crazy cars, right? And I think the advantage of that is the experience of going through the world when you feel safe all the time, right? We're like, oh no, I'm going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine, right? Then you get to feel okay. And the people around you get to feel what it's like to be with a person who feels okay all the time versus someone who is constantly on the verge of, no, we have to do this or it's going to be a disaster, right? It's a very different energy.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So would you say you're a coach or a mentor?
Definitely a coach. I think the to me, the distinction there is, am I coming in with the answers, right? That's more the mentor approach of this is the right way to do things. And the coaching approach is more, let's help you find the way that's right for you. And if I offer any mentorship, it's usually less on operational business stuff because there's a million ways to run a one-on-one, right? Or prioritize a backlog of features or do hiring. But where there are more classical practices around just communication, right? Like how do you give feedback in a way that's less likely to activate someone? Or how do you manage your emotions and work through those in an effective way? So you're not ignoring them, but you're also not at the mercy of them. So that tends to be more where I'll be more directive with clients.
So let's just talk about your role at Slack. So when I was doing the research, it said that you were one of the first employees at Slack as a product manager. How did you get the gig? How did you get the job?
Yeah, let's see. I think as usual, it was about my network, right? So I'd already been working in the tech world for many years at that point. So yeah, I think I knew someone who was already working there. And of course, I'd heard buzz about this company. I tried it out. It seemed like a really interesting product. And yeah, I was looking for my next gig at the time. So I reached out and it was actually a very memorable interview. So I remember I interviewed with founder Stuart Butterfield, but for some reason he needed to go to another meeting downtown. So we actually walked through the perfume section of Bloomingdale's at a high rate. And if you've been to these department stores, right, it's so bright and there's so
Right.
much smells and colors around you. It was like a very overwhelming interview. And I always remember like even that moment thinking, God, like this is such a, I don't know, just like such a strange and wonderful moment being with this inspired entrepreneur blasting through the Bloomingdale's basement on our way to try and get somewhere.
What was your experience at Slack? It could be being one of the earliest employees? I know you run businesses before that, but something that is significant, especially in the tech industry, but Slack is being used across the board now on in lots of different companies and lots of different environments. What was your experience of working with Slack at that very early stage when they were trying to work out where they wanted to go? And I'm thinking about starting businesses and growing businesses in the sense that you're at that early stage and the CEO or the founders looking for that direction. And then your role, and get me wrong if this is not right, but your role was to get the features right to be able to get for that entrepreneurial vision.
It's funny because I think that's what I thought the job was when I signed up for it. What it actually was ended up being somewhat different. And I think the best analogy I have for it is that it was like I was the caretaker for the CEO's child. And the more I've worked with people who work for the CEO, especially a product focused CEO, it's very often the case that way, right? Because usually the founder is very passionate about the product, about the market, about all the details of exactly how they deliver it. But eventually they say, oh, I don't have enough time to get into every detail of this. So I'm going to hire someone else to start to take over this responsibility. But their passion hasn't gone away, right? They still care about this thing like it's their baby. And so I think it's as much a sort of exercise in relationship building and trust with that sort of CEO or founder as it is a sort of product development question. Because if it was just product development, oh, no one's attached to it. We'll just experiment with things, try something, see if it works. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else.
Yeah.
But this was much more, no, this is one of the most meaningful things I've ever done in my life. And I care about it so deeply. Now, show me that you care about it in the same way, that you will treat it with the same care that I treat it, or that the same care that I think about things, or the same sort of framework for how to make decisions. And so I think in the end, that was much more what it was about, was not just what's the right product, but how do we build a process that sort of honors the sort of CEO or founder's intention? Because Stewart was someone who really wanted to get it right. And that was tough, right? That took a lot of trying.
And one of the words you used, which I think is super important as working for a CEO or working with clients, is trust. And that must be huge for you to be able to gain, in that situation, the trust of the CEO there, equal founder. Equally, when you're working with your clients, you must be trying to create a level of trust that they buy into your coaching methodology.
What's interesting, right? I think that in some sense, I think often people say trust is earned, but I find it's more the opposite, that trust is given. Like trust is almost like a leap of faith. And that in some sense, it was very hard for me to earn trust from Stewart because he didn't accept me as I was. He was like, no, don't do it this way. Do it this other way. I don't like the way you're operating here. I don't like the way you're operating here. And so that's why I left after a year, right? Like we were clearly had not built strong trust. And when I'm working with clients, it's very much the opposite, right? Whatever they are, however much trouble they're in, or how frustrated they are, or whatever suffering they're going through, I accept them exactly as they are. And I say, you know what? The way you are is absolutely fine, right? You don't have to change a thing for me or for anyone else. But if you want to change, what change do you want to make? And so that's the luxury you have as a coach, because I'm not their manager, right? I'm not trying to get them to do anything in particular, right? As long as you pay the bills, it's fine by me. And so I think, and that's hard because a manager is always going to have that conflict of interest. I want to develop you, but also it's a business. I need you to do certain things. And so I think that's part of what makes building trust in a managerial relationship really hard versus coaching, where it's pretty straightforward.
Why do you do what you do as a coach now?
Really to reduce suffering, right? I think is the short of it. That I think everyone knows how meaningful being an entrepreneur can be, right? Building a business that's your vision for how the world could be different. Of course that's meaningful, right? And to me, the sort of under-celebrated thing is how much of a cost there is to that, right? That so many people do it for a year or two or three or four, and they're so burnt out and there's so much suffering during that time. So my mission is about helping people be sustainable entrepreneurs, where they can do it for 5 or 10 or 20 years if they want to do it without that sort of deep level of suffering that's unnecessary in the end.
That's really interesting you say about being a sustainable entrepreneur, because the statistics are most businesses fail in the first year, or 60% of business, or some statistics, shockingly statistic, that a lot of businesses fail within the first 2 years.
Yeah. 90% plus.
Is it as much as that? Okay. I'm pretty sure in the tech industry as well, it probably is very fast moving. And so how do you approach sustainability from a mental capacity? Because it feels like what you're doing is part coach, and this is not downgrading what you do, but a little bit like a part therapist as well. You're there to help them on their emotional journey. Like, you're not a mentor telling them to do A, B, and C. You're letting them explore their ideas and where things potentially go in the business. But equally, you're bringing an emotional side into the service that you provide as well, making sure that they are, as you usually use the word, sustainable as an entrepreneur, but equally that they are stopping and enjoying the small successes and building a life that they want to lead, not just how do you approach the emotional aspect on top of the pure coaching side?
I think at the core, it's about having that internal sense of self-worth versus attaching your worth to the business or to outcomes or success by some external measure, right? Because that's the key to all of it, right? Because it's so common that CEOs attach all their self-worth to the success of the business. And like you said, look at the numbers. It's a 90% chance you're going to fail, right? Or more. And so this is not a great strategy for feeling good about yourself. So you're like, okay, I'm signing up for a 90% chance that I'm a failure as a person. No, like this is a terrible way to run your life. And the shift that I generally nudge people along towards is towards, yeah, like I care about the business, but I know it's not a measure of who I am as a person. Because again, that's what gives you that true freedom, right? We talked about entrepreneurs wanting freedom, right?
Mm.
If you're not afraid that this business going the wrong way is going to, make your worth zero, then you can take the big bets and make the big risks and do the things that you want to do and know that if you fail, that it's okay, that there's going to be a next thing and a next thing and a next thing and a next thing.
And I want to loop back to something that a lot I forgot that we were going to talk about is the art of delegation when it comes
Mhm.
to being a business owner, entrepreneur. For me, as an entrepreneur myself, I see the role of delegation as super important. Richard Branson style, he's got 40 businesses and he didn't even know the difference between net profit and gross profit for whatever 15 years of his business. So that style of delegation, is that the key to having a sustainable entrepreneur, having a successful business, being able to know when to let go, drop your ego and let the business go by delegating to really great people?
I'd say that's more one of the downstream effects of having that internal sense of self-worth. Because often the reason that people feel hesitant to delegate is because they want to have control. They say, "Oh, if I delegate, then they're not going to do it exactly the way I want, or I want to supervise in a very detailed way, or they're going to do it more slowly. It's more efficient if I do it myself." And so ultimately, it's because they don't feel safe if it's not done exactly the way they want, that they're not able to delegate. And so if you take the bigger picture of, oh, like even if they do it more slowly, or if they don't do it exactly the way I want to, even if they do a bad job, that's all okay. If they do a bad job, I'll give them feedback or I'll let them go and I'll try someone else. If they do it more slowly, hopefully we'll have more time to try it again another time, right? Or do it more quickly the next time, right? Maybe we're making an investment in being more efficient over time. But whatever it is, once they already feel safe in themselves, then they can have a more long-term view of like, all right, now we're making an investment in delegation, in scaling, in making this business sustainable over the long term, versus just being in a terror of, no, this is scary. Like, I can't let go of control of this. Because I think delegation is just one of many ways that shows up.
What's your plan for the next 2 to 5 years?
My personal plan,
Yes, yours.
gosh, I think keep doing what I'm doing, keep coaching entrepreneurs. I think you mentioned I'm writing a book. So that's one of my big projects. So articulating a lot of the important principles I use with clients. It's called Ask for What You Want. So it's about how to maintain that balance we talked about of how do you ask for what you want and build strong relationships over time. So yeah, that's what I'm excited about for now.
And we've talked about relationships a lot in this conversation. And I was talking to somebody else, and we were talking about the relationships are the bedrock of all business. You need to have good relationships with employees, with clients. And I was giving this example that even if you're talking about something like stocks and shares, right? And people spend their lives on predicting the ups and downs of a stocks or shares. But actually, behind every stocks and share is an account manager that's running the stocks, and behind them is a business owner, a CEO, a founder that's running those businesses that are giving you the numbers for the stocks and shares. So for me, everything that business is should be based on is about building good relationships, understanding the psychology of people, understanding why people make decisions that they make. Why for you are building relationships so important in business?
I think I agree with all that you said there. But yeah, so many reasons. I think, gosh, where to begin, right? I think part of it is about influence, right? That if your life is about making an impact, how do you make impact in the world? Generally through other people. There's not that much you can do on your own. So if you want to make an impact in the world in general, then you need to have good relationships with other people. So I think impact is one answer. Another answer is just general happiness day to day, right? Again, how happy can you really be if you don't have strong relationships, right? It gets lonely,
Mm.
especially as an entrepreneur, right? Where you're doing things on your own, having to make a lot of hard, uncertain decisions. And so strong relationships, knowing that there are people who love you and respect you all around you, can just make that easier. That, yeah, I'm doing something hard, but I have this basis of strong relationships and trust and care so that I know I'm going to be okay no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. I think relationships are the bedrock of every decision we make should be based upon how we can better our relationships with, as I said, employees, with clients, whoever it is. Look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I ask the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quick fire questions. They don't need a quick fire answer. First question is, what's the best decision that you've made?
Mm, gosh, I mean, I don't know. Maybe getting married and having a kid. I think, ironically, one of the most conventional decisions I made, I think, has been the most meaningful. I'd say either that or starting my own coaching business. That these were both things that were scary and different than anything I'd done previously in my life. But I had an intuition that it was the right path for me, and I took a bet. I didn't know for sure, but I took a bet and I jumped, and I've been really happy with the result.
Amazing. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think it's probably on taking responsibility, right? That I do feel like this is one of these classic pieces of wisdom that I've just heard again and again in all sorts of coaching trainings and personal development books I've read over time. Is owning the results you get, right? That it's easy to put blame on other people, but ultimately you're the one that's an agency of your own life. And so if you don't like the results that you're getting, right, take ownership for how you're a part of that. You're not the only piece of it, right? There's also all the other people in the world and the economy and whatever else that's outside of your control. But owning the results that you get is, I think, the beginning to changing those results.
Yeah, it's like a Jocko Willink sort of style, or even a David Goggins, and they are very extremes on this, but they're like every outcome that comes to you is based on your response. So it might not be the things you do, but it's the way you respond to things, and you need to take ownership of those decisions to be able to make better decisions in the future.
For sure.
Right. Next one. Who's helped you most in your career?
Gosh, I think Stuart Butterfield, the CEO of Slack, would have to be on that list because I think it's so funny. I feel like I have so many lovely memories of that and so many painful memories of that company because on the one hand, it was this place where I worked with this amazing team and really got to have that experience of riding a rocket ship and working with the best people in the industry and building really deep relationships with them, making a meaningful impact. And it was where I felt the real pain of not having that trust, of not feeling safe to speak my truth day to day because I was afraid of the consequences. And so I think it really is emblematic of like all the sort of my career that came after that because it taught me the possibilities of entrepreneurship, of like how powerful these companies can be in changing the world, that's not all talk, that it really is something real and worthwhile and meaningful, and that all that pain and suffering is just as worthwhile and meaningful to try and avoid, right? Because I suffered so much during that year at that company and in the years afterwards. I don't know, it made me passionate about helping other people avoid that.
Amazing. Tell me about a regret that you have.
Gosh, I guess I just regret not beginning this journey sooner. I think that I spent so much of my career obsessed with being right because I was a smart kid in school. And so my whole life, I talking about strategies for feeling safe. My strategy for feeling safe was being right. Because guess what? I was very good at getting all the right answers on the tests. When I went into the work world, I was very good at saying the right thing in the meeting or pulling the right thing out of the data. And being right all the time was very important to me. And gosh, I was very smart and convincing in meetings. But again, think about the relationship cost, right? Do you really want to hang out with someone who thinks they're right all the time? Those people tend to be assholes. And I learned that lesson again and again until I finally woke up to you got to let go of being right. Nobody knows what's right until it's too late, right? We don't
Mm.
know what's going to be the right decision until later on when we see the outcomes. And so I think there's a certain way in which these days I try to balance more saying, okay, I have certain level of certainty, but I can't know for sure whether or not I'm right. And other people have all sorts of other perspectives that might be just as right or more right than the one I have. And gosh, I wish I had learned that lesson sooner because there was a lot of suffering associated with that.
What are you most proud of?
I guess my family, right? I think that it's one of those things where I don't know, or maybe I'd expand it to the long-term relationships I built in general. Because I think one distinction I make between my career before I went into coaching and after is before I had people I worked with, I had some friends at the office, but often once I left the job, we'd fall out of touch. It wasn't really a deep long-term relationship. And I
Mm.
think there is something that's changed in terms of that relationship building since then, because not only has my sort of family life gotten so much deeper and more loving and more meaningful because my relationships with my wife and my son are so strong, but also my professional relationships are different too. That these clients I work with, I really care about them, right? I really believe in them and their possibilities as leaders. And so even after we stop working together, I tend to keep in touch with most of my clients because I care about where they go next. And I every time I see on LinkedIn win for them, I feel like it's a little bit of a win for me. And yeah, just to me, that's because my business now isn't about making a product or selling things, right? It's about human impact. And so when I see that human impact, that means a lot to me, right? That's something I'm really proud of.
Amazing. What does legacy mean to you?
Hmm. I guess legacy to me is around impact, but also looking at it more from the long term. And the question I'll sometimes ask clients is when they don't know what to do is what would your 80-year-old self say, right? If you were looking back on this moment in your life, or what would you want people to say about you at your funeral? And to me, that kind of gets at legacy, right? If they're not going to say Kenneth was great at cost cutting at my funeral, right? There's going to be something hopefully deeper, more meaningful that they remember about who Kenneth was or what he stood for in his life. And so I think that highlights how taking a stand for what you believe in is important because that's the stuff that is lasting, that does provide a legacy.
Yeah. And where should people go if they want to find out more about you or your coaching service?
Please check out kberger.com, KBERGER, and lots of information there. And you're welcome to reach out or follow me on LinkedIn, Kenneth Berger.
Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much and good luck in the future.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Business Growth Talks. This podcast is released every Monday, so don't miss an episode by subscribing to all podcast platforms, including Apple and Spotify. Have a great day.